What we have is the difference between intermediates, which are those in between the primaries and secondaries on a 12-step color wheel, and tertiary colors. A tertiary color is a thing, but it ain't on the color wheel. It's a completely different thing. So on the color wheel, even though they're labeled with a 3 and everybody still calls them tertiary colors, we actually don't have tertiary colors. What then is a tertiary color? Well, instead of having it on a color wheel, we're going to think of it as something that shows up on the color pyramid, which is coming to us from Goethe, the German philosopher / researcher / guy who wrote a lot. So the difference between a color pyramid and a color wheel is that we're showing how these mixtures happen. When we look at a pyramid, we still have our primary, red, yellow, blue, labeled 1, 2, and 3, because apparently the person who makes this chart likes red more than blue, whatever. And then you can see that if I mix red, 100% red, with yellow, 100% yellow, I get orange, which theoretically is 50% red and 50% yellow. These are our secondary colors. And they're going to go ahead and show you the intermediate colors, which are the mixture of a primary plus an adjacent secondary. So we're still using the same definition, an intermediate. Because an intermediate, say red-orange, has more red than it does yellow, because you're mixing something that's half red with something that's all red, we're going to label it with the primary color that it starts with plus the secondary color. So we call it red-orange instead of orange-red. That's what's happening on the outside of this construction. We've got primary plus primary equals secondary. Primary plus adjacent secondary equals intermediate. What we get in the middle are tertiary colors, and tertiary colors are secondary plus secondary. So purple plus orange gives you a tertiary color. And here's where we get back to the theoretical versus what actually happens when we try to do things with pigments. Goethe liked the idea of thinking about this in theory. And so what he says is that if I mix purple, which is half red and half blue, with orange, which is half yellow and half red, then theoretically the orange and the blue are going to cancel each other out because they're complementary. But what we then we'll have is something that gets back to the shared primary. So his theory was that you could derive a primary by mixing two secondaries together. The complements will cancel each other out, and you'll be left with the shared primary that they have. So theoretically, you would get back to red. And you can see here we're 50% red, 25% yellow, 25% blue. Does it work? Heck no, because we got all that heckin' other stuff going on. And so there's just going to be a big brownish blob, and we're back to bleh kind of colors. So what we want to do for us is to unlearn what you probably learned in high school or elementary school. Do they talk about tertiary colors in elementary school? I don't think so. Whatever. A tertiary color is the result of a secondary plus a secondary and is not on the color wheel. An intermediate color is the result of a primary plus an adjacent secondary, and that's what's on the color wheel. Now you're smart, you've been to art school, you know this. That said, when you're hanging out with all your friends on the weekend and you're like talking about color theory, as one does when hanging out with one's friend, and you have your bud and he's like, oh man, I really love those tertiary colors like yellow, green, just go with it. Most people use the definition of intermediate when they're talking about tertiary colors. Don't make them feel bad. They can't help it. They're probably business majors.